girls and 2 boys or whatever. Are you recording this?
I am. We're
Well,
gonna listen to how my daddy met my mama.
There was a couple of boys about the same age, and they thought they were the fastest runners in town, and I thought I was too, so we had it on. But anyhow, I went. This was I imagine I must have been about 8 years old.
When you met Mama?
Let me tell you now, there was another girl involved.
I know you had a different girl involved.
And she was just a hair younger, I think. And she had those 2 boys. In fact, she had 3 brothers. And I would go to her house at night when it was actually getting even almost dark. I would go to her house. It was 8 miles away. And
You were 8 years old?
yeah, I wasn't very old.
And you walked
I
8
could've
miles?
been- I could have been 9.
Interesting.
I could have been 9 years. I don't know.
He told me the same
But
story.
listen,
He was 8 years old.
I
then,
went
too.
over there to see the boys, but I was really going over there to see her. Now, when I got there, her mother was pretty guarded, if you know what I mean.
Her mother guarded the child.
She kept a close eye on her daughter. And I didn't realize why until a few years later. But I finally found out that her daughter had a disease. It was a heart disease. It was rheumatic fever. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it affects the heart.
Mama had that?
No, this is
it's
the
like
other
a
girl
girl.
The
before
girl.
that, Mama.
Oh, another girl.
Those
You-
boys,
when you listen to that
those
story,
boys
you'll
that I went to see,
Yeah.
get the brothers.
and I was actually going to see the girl,
Mm-hmm.
but the girl's the one that had it.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't know she had it.
This before you
And
met Mama.
after a year or two, or however long, I found out why her mother was so guarded about her was because of she had rheumatic fever, and that's a heart disease that you have to really be careful about. So that was the situation there. And after I found out, then her mother became a little bit less guarded and was allowing me a little bit more opportunity. But by that time, I was getting almost old enough to drive the car. I was driving a bike before
Well,
that.
when did you meet Mama? We wanted to know.
Well, I met your mother because she was the other lady at church, at school, that was walking around the schoolhouse holding this gal's hand.
She was friends with the rheumatic fever girl.
Yeah, I really was her friend. She was my, if you want to call it that, a childhood sweetheart.
Which one?
Called the first one.
The rheumatic fever one?
Yeah, because I don't know how you were supposed to feel, but I was really in love with her. And I just, I don't know,
So we might have all looked different, huh?
I would have done most anything to make time with that girl. Anyhow, my wife that I wound up with was her friend. And after a while, I just realized that I was probably running down the wrong track, and I started dating her. And I guess you could say the rest is history.
We want to know about that, though. That was the whole point.
Well,
Yes.
How old were you when you
I want to
started
get back to
dating
how who
Mama?
won the race.
And when you
Okay.
You and them boys thought y'all was the fastest.
I started dating this girl the first time. I was 16 years old, I think, when
Which girl?
The
this,
one with rheumatic fever.
no, the other one,
Mom.
Mom?
the other one,
Mom. There's
The-
only two. There's
the
with
one that
rheumatic
was
fever.
holding her hand when they walked around
Your
the school
mother,
building.
Nancy.
Anyway, they were real good friends to start with, and then I was realizing that I weren't making much headway going with her, so I made a date and went with this other gal. Well, she was in the same grade of school or one grade higher, I don't remember, but anyway, I made a date with her, and I was 16 because this was my first night driving a car. And I was a little bit reckless. But I took her to a basketball game, and I drove in. I drove in the driveway on a little bit, not no two wheels, but
Too fast.
a little bit reckless. And so she was sitting on the other side of the car, and I swung her over, sitting in my lap. And she said something about, "Is that the only way you can get me over here?" So anyway, but we went to that ball game, and then I took her home, and I got to know her parents. They were old farmers, and they supposedly owned the land, but it was a small land, and they had a small tobacco acreage. Tobacco acreage was everything on the farm. That was their money crop. But they weren't making the bills every year, and they were about to lose the farm. You remember somebody said Uncle Harvey?
Yeah,
It was his brother.
that was Marvin.
Yeah,
Marvin Riggs.
Mary's dad's name
Marvin.
was Marvin, and of course his brother was Harvey, run the store. Anyway, I skipped a whole year of work and stayed at their place and helped them farm, trying to help them pay their bills and stuff. When we got all through, I don't think they made much gain. Anyway, I went back to work. Well, I went to town. It was 16 miles away, and it was a little sign up over the door at that place where across the street from where I went to work. But this little sign had a big old bear sticking up on it, and there's a clock above it, and it's indicated that town was settled in 1710. Well, that was kind of a long time ago. But it was named after Bern, Switzerland. And the town we were in was named New Bern. And so, but I went across the street, went in the door, and talked to this guy about a job. And he told me to come in. He needed a help. He needed a man to work, and I needed a job. And that's all I knew about propane, and that was a propane store. And so he took me in the back room there and showed me a few things about how to connect a pipe, and how to hook it up, and this, that, and the other. And when I got all through, he said, "Now, you are the expert because you know more than the customer knows. And so he said, go home prepared to come back and go to work. And so I did. I went home and I came back the next day and went to work. Well, just about half a block down the street was a bar, where people gather for their beer, and I don't know if they had anything stronger or not, but my dad just happened to be working there. In fact, he was one of their best customers. I don't know if you know what that meant, but
They drink a lot of their beer.
he drank every other bottle, and he wound up drunk. He wound up drunk, and he got fired. And then he come down to where I was working. I had gone to work at this other place, and he come down there and stood over and looked at me like he was some big successful guy. And he said, yeah, so that's the way I got my start. But anyway, that was kind of funny to me.
I see you still never told us who was the fastest kid in your school. You were talking about racing them dudes.
Oh, I didn't have nothing else to say about it.
He must have not been the best.
Let me
Your
tell.
daddy was fast.
Let me tell you this, guys. The little shop next door was kind of a Mexican restaurant. And they cooked up a bunch of onions in a skillet with seasoning and all kinds of mess. And I guess it was fairly good if you didn't have nothing else on your hot dog or hamburger. And then he would sell the hot dogs for 5 cents a piece.
Wow.
And he sold the hamburgers for 15 cents a piece. And he put a spoonful of that stuff on each one of them. That he didn't charge extra for that. Anyway, that's where I would get my hot dogs and hamburgers. And at that time, I think that was a little earlier, but before that happened, I was living out on the farm, and I might have been 10 years old then, I don't know, but anyway, a soda pop, it might have been 10 ounces instead of the size I got now. But anyway, it was 5 cents. And a nice big candy bar, Babe Ruth, and that was 5 cents also. And you could take 3 eggs to the store, and sometimes we did because we had some eggs. We had some chickens. But anyway, I lived about a mile away from the store, and I would go out there and give him 3 eggs and have a drink in a candy bar. There was an old man that was blind in one eye, and he lived about 2 blocks from the store. And that turned out to be one of my dad's buddies. He would go out there and stop and visit with that old man, and they would visit and visit and visit. I don't know all about, but probably farming and tobacco, because that's all my dad knew anything about. And it was a few years later, or close to it, maybe I was 12, I don't know. But that's when all the people around there, they'd never seen a Mormon. And so the only thing they knew about Mormons was that they had more than one wife and they had horns. And so pretty soon my mother got a hold of a pamphlet, and her uncle, whose name was Lewis Brown, I I was turned out to be named after him, and he was her next to the oldest brother. She had one more brother that was older than that. He was named Claude Douglas Brown, and that was the name of his dad, was Claude Douglas Brown. Anyway, he lived about a mile over in the field, maybe 3/4 of a mile or something. And Mother had written to Salt Lake City on the back of that pamphlet. It says, if you want to know more, write this address. So she wrote that address. I guess she thought they were going to send her some more pamphlets. But anyway, 2 or 3 months went by, and all of a sudden these 2 missionaries knocked on the front door. Well, knowing what my dad did about Mormons, he ran them off with a shotgun. But anyway, my mother was old enough that she could make up her own mind. But I wasn't old enough, and you weren't going to have us kids joining none of that mess. And so my mother went over to my uncle, Lewis Brown, and he had a younger, she and he had a younger brother named Charles Brown. Somebody, if you're old
I
enough,
remember Uncle Charles.
if you're old enough, you might
I
remember him.
remember Lewis. I remember all of them.
Okay. Well, they set up every night. They had dinner. Assuming they started on the beginning of the week, they'd have dinner. Then they would sit up till midnight or after studying. And I imagine they had a prescribed list, but I don't know what it was. They just studied. And so after they got through studying, they'd go to bed. Then they would come right back the next night and do the same thing all over again. And so they did that for about a week. And my mother, along about Friday, said, this is what I've been looking all of my life. And we used to go to a Baptist church, and we didn't never join it, but we went once in a while because it was going about a mile from the house. Incidentally, right next to the old store where I'd get my 5-cent drink. But anyway, she didn't want to wait around. This was in December, by the way, and it was cold in December. And she didn't want to be waiting around for the spring thaw. And her brother felt the same way. So they decided that they wanted to go ahead and be baptized. And back of our house was a river, about a half a mile down the hill. And it was about half as big as the Columbia River. It wasn't near as big and swift and all that, but it was similar. And so they went down there and made arrangements. They got the preacher and whoever else wanted to go to the baptism, and I think I was right there. Anyhow, I kind of exaggerated a little bit, I think, but I told them they had to break ice in order to get in there and get baptized. It was cold as ice anyway, and so that's the way they done it. They got baptized right there on the riverbank in that ice water, and that showed a pretty strong testimony right there. But anyhow, that's where they got their start so far as the church is concerned. And back then there was no chapels. There was no men in the area that held a priesthood. In fact, Uncle Lewis Brown, and I don't know who baptized him, but He joined the church. He was the first male member in the area that joined the church.
Is he the one that did the dairy farm?
Yeah, he had.
Hunter?
He's the one that moved to Salt Lake City and became a farmer for the church.
Did the dairy farm, yeah.
Yeah, but it was a dairy farm, yeah. But
So you were 17 when you first were introduced to propane, huh?
I was 17, right there about.
Was that before or after you got married?
Oh, it was before I got married.
Well, didn't you get married at 17?
I was 17, so I must have been 16.
Okay.
Because Mary was 16. I was 17 when I got married.
You got
Yeah.
married in July, you turned 18 in October.
July the 17th.
Just had an anniversary.
And I didn't know that I weren't old enough to go to the temple. I just assumed, since I didn't have the money to go and I would have to save up a couple of weeks vacation from my work, that I didn't even think about the fact that I weren't old enough to go to the temple. But by the time I got enough money saved up and I got me a 2-week space of vacation, I must have been old enough, because when I got to Salt Lake, my wife and I, we had 2 kids, by the way, and my mother went with us, and we went into the temple and just sit there, and boy, that was a good feeling. It was different. But anyhow, the people, Vernon Madsen was a missionary in our little town there, Newbern, and he had evidently told his parents a little bit about us. And then when we got out there, he told us to look up his parents. They lived about 15 miles south of Salt Lake City, south of the temple. So when we got there, before I left home, I backed this car in the driveway. I had just bought it, and I paid $95 for it, and I had to finance half of that. The bank took care of that part because I knew some people down there. But then I went to my friendly garage that worked on my trucks that I drove for the gas company, and the old boy took my cars in to work on, and he found out that I had to spend $250 on the cars to get them in shape so we could drive them. And so he took me down to the bank, and he signed the note and got his money from the bank, and I had to start paying them payments for the rest of my life, or however long it was. Anyway, we finally got all ready to go, and I was driving the gas truck back and forth to work. So I just backed the car down in the driveway to let it sit. And after we had saved up enough money to make it, it was on a Saturday morning, I think, and we got into the car and took off. Well, before we took off, the car wouldn't start, and so we had to push it out of the driveway to get it started. Y'all listening to this story, it don't matter.
You might want to shut it off and
I
start
think-
again. That's
I
a different
think-
story.
Yeah, it's a very long